Welcome to the show Perspective. I'm Sana Makbool, and in today's show, we will be looking at the farmers' protests that have been going on in India for the third week now, what they entail, why they're happening so far, and what options and challenges do they raise for the BJP government led by Narendra Modi. We know that these protests began because of the three laws reform agenda that the Modi government has been talking about, considering the situation of the agriculture sector, which has been in devastation for a while now. We know that a large population of India, the worker population, comes from the agriculture sector. More than 60% of them are involved in this sector. The industry is huge in India, but since a while it has been suffering, and it has only accounted for 15% of the GDP in India. A lot of the farmers that have been protesting these reform laws talk about how they lose the security for the staple crops such as wheat and rice, and they will be vulnerable to larger markets and big companies and will be exploited by the rich. The government argues that this reform agenda is extremely important because it will allow the farmers to eliminate the middleman and be able to explore new markets. However, this remains to be questioned what exactly needs to be done to improve the agriculture sector, whether or not this reform agenda is going to give the farmers what they want. Considering this is not what they want, they have been sitting at a blockade for New Delhi for 3 weeks now in severe conditions. Many of them are older than a certain age. We also don't know that recently a Sikh priest also committed suicide, considering the situation that has been going on, and the farmers are demanding a repeal of these laws. Now we also know the fact that it's not just limited to India, but this protest has also sparked other protests in other parts of the world, largely of the Sikh population, considering the fact that they do have associations with the farmlands in Punjab. Their families belong to Punjab, and a lot of them depend on the agriculture sector for their growth and their livelihoods. And so because this protest is now reaching the international market, it now makes us question whether or not the people sitting in the international community are going to take this seriously, whether or not India is going to be questioned for what it's doing in terms of not just its human rights violations, not just what it does to its minorities, but also considering the fact that now this is about the farmers in India. This is about a large number of population that people in India associate themselves with, and how Modi is going to reconcile his policy of the Hindutva regime in India first, when considering the people in India themselves are suffering now. So that remains to be seen. For further discussion on this and what is going to be the future course of action, we've been joined by many guests with us in the studio. First, I would like to introduce our guest who've been joined us on Skype. He is the Principal Advisor, Sikh Federation UK, Mr. Dabinderjeet Singh. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
We've also been joined in the studio by the following guests. We have been joined by senior analyst, Mr. Javed Judoon. Thank you very much for joining with us, sir. And we've also been joined by Central Secretary Information PTI, Mr. Ahmed Jawad. Thank you for being with us. And our correspondent from PTV World has also joined us, Musharraf Zaroor. Thank you for joining us and being part of the show. Before I begin with the guests in the studio, I'd like to engage you, Mr. Dabinderjeet Singh, and thank you very much for joining us. Considering the fact that we know that a lot of Sikhs all over the world and all over India are involved in protesting these farm laws and making sure that their support is heard. They're also trying to make sure that the authorities in their respective countries are also responding to this protest and to the situation that these farmers are facing and how big of a deal it is for them and their livelihoods. Considering a lot of movement that the Sikhs have been trying to engage the leaders in, do you think that you've been getting the kind of response that is needed from the local authorities to make sure that India and Narendra Modi takes this into account and make sure that these protests and their demands are heard? How much do you think is the Sikh diaspora around the world making an effort?
I think what we touched on PTC Global last week was how the Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, was asked the question around the farmers' protests. And what we've seen in the last week is the Foreign Secretary from the UK made a 4-day visit to India, which finished yesterday. He met Narendra Modi, he met the External Affairs Minister, and it's fair to say that the media challenged Dominic Raab to ask him, did he raise these issues? And two things became very clear. One, he did not raise these issues with Narendra Modi, but he did raise them with the External Affairs Minister. Now, there were two issues that were being pushed. One was the issue of the peaceful farmer protests, and the second issue was a wider issue around the human rights violations that have been committed by the Indian authorities. Because when a foreign minister goes to India, these are legitimate questions that should be asked. And I think where we've come in a week is just like the Modi government has been surprised by the reaction of the farmers across India that have come together and the support they've gathered. Similarly, the UK government have realised within a week we have Conservative members of Parliament that have written to us saying we went to 10 Downing Street last Friday. We asked the special advisors who's advising the Prime Minister. Others said we met Dominic Raab before he went to India. And therefore, India and the Indian authorities have tried to say all these outside politicians, like the Canadian Prime Minister, ministers in Canada, congressmen in the USA, politicians in Australia and the UK, they should stay out. But what's become very loud and clear is those politicians cannot stay quiet because, one, it's the diaspora community that's saying we are concerned about our families and our loved ones and our ancestral homes. And secondly, it's become a huge challenge to the Indian authorities. And the fear is, since this protest started, roughly one person has died every day. And you mentioned Baba Ram Singh, who committed suicide. These things then have a way of touching people and galvanizing people. But the fact is, people are prepared to put their lives at risk to make sure that India, the Indian authorities, take back these laws. And we could talk about what's been happening in the Supreme Court, because I think that's a very interesting angle that shows that the Narendra Modi government doesn't know now how to deal with this issue.
Right. And of course, the important question again remains that how much are we going to expect and see from the Narendra Modi government in the aftermath of all this? We know in the past as well that a lot of issues have been highlighted, not just the farmers' protests, but a lot of other things. For example, last year it was the citizenship law, and we saw a lot of protests, and it was a big challenge for the Modi government. But a lot of it was pushed back, luckily, by the coronavirus situation for the Modi government, and also because this was then not this was then given this anti-nationalist agenda. A lot of people in Mr. Modi's party have been trying to do the same for this one, but it's difficult to do so considering these are Indian farmers involved. If you think that this is not being something that is being ignored by people in the UK, for example, and that the diaspora and different parts of the world, people are raising their voice, and also the farmers' response was unexpected, will this be able to translate into something tangible by the Modi government? Will they have to do something, walk back and save face? How are they going to do that? And are they being pushed to that point, considering that they have been talking about the opposition amplifying the situation for their own interests, or calling this something run by the Sikh separatists, and giving it an anti-nationalist color?
I think what the Indian authorities have tried to do, they've tried to demonize the issue. You know, blame the separatists, blame Pakistan, blame China, blame everyone you can. But ultimately, the blame rests with the Indian government that passed these laws when they knew there was going to be controversy. What they didn't expect was the level of protest when we had the coronavirus. So I think this is something that's being widely debated, is how will the Modi government save face? Because one thing is very clear, what we're getting, the information we're getting from the ground, is the farmers will not back down. And I think, I mentioned the Supreme Court, the Chief Justice of India said he was very sympathetic towards the farmers. The Attorney General tried to get the Supreme Court to say these protests should not be allowed, but the protests are being allowed. And secondly, I think what we'll see is we'll see the Modi government consider all its options. It could use force, it could bring in the paramilitary, but it will run a huge risk because its international reputation is at stake. Because just like the farmers in India, the diaspora community will not stay silent. It will make sure that politicians in different countries know about this, and India's reputation on the international stage will be damaged for decades if they take those steps. So I think they need to rely on the courts and get out of this, or they're going to have a real problem.
All right, and this is something that the international media is also and has been taking up for a while now, considering, of course, this has now grown into a large-scale protest that is not only limited to India. We'll take a look at a short clip from BBC News before we speak to our guests in the studio. Take a listen.
Leaders of protesting Indian farmers have begun a one-day hunger strike against agricultural reforms they say threaten their livelihoods. The reforms, contained in 3 laws enacted in September, loosen rules around the sale, pricing and storage of farm produce. More than half of India's working population comes from the agricultural sector. That's according to the country's most recent census. But farmers have also seen their economic influence fade over the last 3 decades. Once producing a third of India's GDP, farming now only accounts for around 15%. Small growers fear these new laws will mean the end of price support for staples such as wheat and rice and leave them at the mercy of big business. But the government argues that laws will make the sector more efficient by giving farmers a wider market to sell to. Thousands of people have been taking part in protests across the UK and the world to show support for the farmers in India. Many of them originate from farming backgrounds in the Punjab and have family members protesting in Delhi. Monica Plaha has been speaking to 2 British protesters whose family livelihood depend on farming.
Standing up to the new farming bills. Until change is made, Indian farmers show no sign of leaving the Delhi border. And this hasn't gone unnoticed. Demonstrations across the world have taken place in support of farmers. But thousands of miles away, why do British people feel so strongly? Sun Kaur has been campaigning for weeks.
My uncles and aunties from my mum's side, as well as my dad's side, from Punjab, have travelled
all right, and there are many like that because, of course, a lot of people who are living abroad, they have linkages to the people and the farmers in Punjab. They have lands there and they have families there, and they feel very strongly for their families and their livelihoods, considering, of course, that agriculture is what they've established and is where their growth comes from. Before we move on to what Narendra Modi's options are and whether or not this challenge is going to be taken responsibly by the Indian government and how they're going to maneuver this now that they've let this grow into such a huge protest in the country and all over the world as well. First, I would like to understand, considering the fact that these 3 laws were started in the first place, according to the Indian government, to help the farmers, to help the agriculture sector, to help the farming industry. They argue that it's good for them, considering that you're losing the middleman and you're helping them reach out to bigger markets. And the farmers feel differently, considering that they feel that they will be open to exploitation and will be vulnerable, and they won't be able to have that safety net for their staple crops. What exactly is wrong with this reform agenda? If this is to help the farmers, then why is it not doing so?
Thank you very much. I think Prime Minister Modi is under tremendous pressure domestically. It's not only the farmers who are protesting and barricading around capital New Delhi. Indian economy has suffered a lot, was really badly hit because of the pandemic, and all their estimates that they would be able to contain or stem the pandemic, I think everything went wrong. Prime Minister Modi is intransigence in dealing with every issue, every challenge, whether be that domestic or international,
right,
even towards Pakistan as well. We have seen that Prime Minister Modi has taken a position which is to kind of appease his own domestic lobby, that is the hawkish lobby in India, led by RSS and Sangh Parivar. Same is the case with the Indian farmers' protests, because they are coming from the breadbasket of India, mainly from Haryana, Punjab and Uttar Pradesh.
Right.
And I think it is total insensitivity towards the plight of the farmers, because what they're demanding is a very simple thing. They don't want to be left on the mercy of the private companies, because they have the apprehensions that ultimately the government might not buy their produce at the bare minimum prices which are being guaranteed to them.
Right.
So I think it is the kind of insecurity which have pushed the farmers out of their homes, and in this severe cold weather, they are open under the sky and protesting against those particular laws. But what is strange, even today, I think Prime Minister Modi has shown his intention to negotiate or engage with the protesting farmers, but I don't see any sincere effort towards resolving the issue. And I think another factor which could play its role, being under pressure from domestic factors, Prime Minister Modi, as Pakistan, has shown the apprehension there could be a false flag operation against Pakistan as well.
Right.
Today, Foreign Minister spoke in UAE at the conclusion of his visit, and he told the media that Pakistan does have the information and intel reports that Modi government, which is a hawkish government, which is an extremist government, which is being guided and led by RSS and Sangh Parivar, can carry out some misadventure against Pakistan.
And
I think
that
the reason,
happening every time
and the reason
the international
why
right
I'm
is
linking,
shining strongly.
this particular aspect with the Indian, with Modi's domestic troubles, is that he's not going to resolve the issue of the farmers. So why not divert the attention?
And that's always been the case. Always when the international light is shining,
ultimately
this is what
put pressure
the
on
Indian
Pakistan.
government has been doing. And of course, so that is a genuine threat that the country has been facing. But right now, India is under a lot of pressure from a lot of angles, considering that Pakistan has also been giving a lot of evidence regarding terrorist networks that India has been engaging with to destabilize Pakistan. And then we've seen the EU Disinfilab report come out as well, who's talked about this entire 15-year network and campaign to malign Pakistan. And then we've seen a lot of human rights abuses. We've seen the Indian Citizenship Act. Within India also, there's been a lot of protests going on. And now we've seen this farmers' protest, which apparently was not something that the Modi government expected. Yet, we have seen that Modi's popularity seems not to fade, really. He has won the re-election again by a majority in 2019, and we've seen that that continues to happen even though there were a lot of protests going on. So even if we're to say that the farmers' protest is something huge and unexpected, do we actually see a real challenge to the Modi government, Mr. Ahmed? Is it posing a serious challenge to Modi's authority and his reputation or his government reform agenda that he has?
I think Modi government, right from the beginning, they have carried the mindset of RSS, and that is, I think, most suitable to the extremist Hindu lobby, and they are quite happy with that. I think this is a problem in every country where majority adopts a hawkish policy towards the minority. Now, if we'll be analyzing the popularity of the party which is depending on the majority, perhaps it's a very difficult proposition that how much minority can make a difference in an election.
Right.
And
every
country.
The farmer does enjoy a large voter base. This is.
Yeah, I mean, but still they are in the minority, and but you see, what you have to see that it's not just one case of farmers which caught the attention of the whole world, the human rights organization. It is a series of Indian mindsets, especially under the Modi government. It started with Kashmir and the annexation of Kashmir, and then in Assam also, they about 2 million people, they were suddenly lost their citizenship, and they were looking for their citizenship in a country, imagine.
Yes, that was huge.
And it's not just one minority. So their mindset, this majority mindset, it attacking the minority, they are attacking the religious groups, they are even they are attacking the media and the freedom of expression.
But Mr. Ahmed, the consequences don't justify and are parallel with what is going on. At the end of the day, all of this has happened, and it other things are still continuing to happen.
No, but I think things are now going bad towards for the
Has
for
the
Modi.
Modi government suffered a serious blow to his government or not?
I think this farmer movement, I think it has given a serious blow to the Modi government.
All right.
You know, this the strike which took place after the first farmer movement towards Delhi Chalo movement, there were the strike which was called by the farmers. It was participated by 250 million people in India. So imagine, perhaps there has never been such a big strike by one group. 250 million people participated in that. So I think within India also, the sane group, the opposition, they are also realizing that this kind of attitude and this kind of mindset will lead India towards a breakup. And now India is also facing the pressure from the international community. The Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, he has condemned the farmers movement and the violation of rights of the farmers. And the Sikh community all over
Even
the
that
world.
did not go down too well with India, of course, because
In
it's
the
too
European
sensitive to its
Union,
internal
in
problems.
European Union, there have been voice against human right violation. In United Nations, there have been voice against the Indian violation. I think Indian face has been exposed, I think, never before in the history of India.
Okay.
It has happened under the Modi rule. And so
Okay.
I think they are now inching towards a serious situation in India. Their international repute and their international image is tarnished. So this is not just going to just fade
Vanish.
away,
All
this
right.
incident.
Okay, Musharraf, like Mr. Ahmed was talking about the fact that Justin Trudeau has also commented on this situation and said the farmers have a right to protest. You're aware of India's sensitivity to the fact that whatever goes on inside India is an internal matter, nobody should speak up against it. And that's the same sort of response that we've seen regarding the farmers' protests as well. All of this international attention that this is gaining is not going down too well with the Modi government. But now that it is there, and now that the farmers have been sitting there for more than 3 weeks now, how does the Modi government deal with this situation without seeming like they have suffered a defeat, without being able to say that they were wrong and they need to repeal the laws and this is now the protesters' victory? How do they walk away from this or save face, or do they not have to? Can the Modi government push through this and make sure that the laws stay like the rest of them?
It seems really difficult for Modi government to avoid a situation which they are going to face, especially on domestic as well as on an international front. But they are trying their best to avoid that situation, and they are trying to engage farmers through negotiations. But it seems that it may not be possible this time that they will be able to hoodwink their domestic audience as well as the international audience, as it has been observed so far. First of all, we need to see these protests in specific socio-political conditions which are prevalent.
Sure.
And that actually helped these farmers, about over 300,000 farmers who have rallied in New Delhi, Indian capital. So we need to see that those socio-political environment in which minorities feel unsafe, the citizen law, may it be Kashmir, may it be other minorities, they really felt unsafe in the presence of RSS goons, in the presence of cow vigilantes. And now once Modi government was implementing that RSS agenda, and the country was also reeling under COVID-19 situation that brought in unemployment in India. And they suddenly, introduced these 3 laws which were controversial, and farmers, they rose against that, and they really felt as if their livelihood, Indian government, BJP-led Indian government wanted to, take up, yes, their livelihoods, and they really want to, now it's on Modi government is on to especially Punjabi Sikhs.
Right, and
So-
they have come from so far away. They have even cycled so many
Yes.
kilometers. They have come
Yes.
from all the different places, and they've been sitting there for so long in very harsh conditions.
Yes.
And like Darbinderjit Singh was saying, despite the coronavirus situation.
Yes, and you see the unemployment was really rampant, especially after COVID-19, and the farmer community makes up 70% of Indian population.
Right.
So it is too hard to think that the farmers will back off from their demands, and especially the Punjabi Sikhs who have went an extra mile, and
Right.
they have religious sentiments also aligned to this their stance against these three laws. So I think Modi government would have to
They can't
budge,
ignore
and they can't get away with this.
All right. Mr. Darbinderjit Singh, considering the fact that the Modi government may be able to approach the farmers and is going to try for negotiations and is probably moving towards that direction, considering the fact that the farmers have talked about the repeal of these laws, they need these reforms and this agenda to completely go back to how it was. Do you think there's a possibility of a middle ground to be reached through these negotiations? Do you think that the farmers can or could agree to something which is less than the repeal of these laws?
I think the farmers have made it very clear that they want these laws taken back. And I think this is the dilemma that the Modi government faces. It went to the Supreme Court to try and stop the protest. They didn't succeed. When the Supreme Court started to say, the Chief Justice of India said to the Attorney General, the government should not implement these laws, the response from the Attorney General was, well, then the farmers will not negotiate. So I think the government would like to negotiate. The farmers are willing to sit down as they have, but I think, and I'm reflecting on what some of the other guests have said, the difference this time round is since this current Modi government was elected, they embarked on a series of policies against Kashmir around citizenship, because this isn't just a BJP thing. The Congress government in 1984 tried to wipe out a minority, which was the Sikhs, for the popular vote. So having had that popular vote, Narendra Modi's government targeted Kashmir, used those new laws, but unfortunately, they've bitten off too much with the farmers' issue. And the reason why I say that is, whilst the Punjabis and the Sikhs have been leading the way, this has spread across India, across different faith communities, and I think the Modi government is now very much lost. And I think a lot of the international media see this as a much bigger challenge for the future of the Modi government, because if they make a mistake, they may regret it and perhaps never be able to take power again. The unfortunate thing is the opposition parties in India are too weak. And what we saw in Punjab was the Shromani Akali Dal, which was the alliance for the BJP. Initially, they were supporting these laws. Then we saw them resign and now gone completely in the opposite direction, because they realized that the farmer movement is actually much stronger and much bigger than anyone realized. And I think even the farmers themselves did not know how this would become actually the true opposition.
It would gain so much
to
momentum.
the Modi government.
Right. And Mr. Darbinderjit Singh, the fact is that considering that the farmers themselves didn't expect such a big response from the international community, and like you said, what the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice has been saying, it does give the farmers more ground to say that we still want the repeal of these laws, we're not open to negotiations. Considering all of these factors, do you think that the Modi regime is going to be forced to actually repeal this law? Do you think there's a possibility that they may actually have to step back altogether from this?
I think Modi's reputation is built on strength. And he has a real dilemma here because he's come up against perhaps a bigger strength. So if he backs down on these laws, I think he will be permanently damaged. Therefore, I think the reason why we've been taking these messages to the United Nations and to foreign governments is what we're seeing through tear gas, batons and, water cannon. That is only the tip of the iceberg because the world is watching. I'm sure that the Modi government is considering the use of paramilitary forces. They could be considering, as you said, to create a diversion. So I think he will be very reluctant to back down, but I think this is the biggest ever question Narendra Modi will face. If he makes the mistake, he will live to regret it.
Right, and that of course remains to be seen what choices he makes and what the future course of action is going to be taken. Before we talk about the possibility that paramilitary forces may be involved or that these protests may be dispersed by using force, a lot of it is already happening, especially with elderly protesters. First, let's talk about the fact that, of course, a lot of Modi's regime is based on the popular vote, based on the Hindutva ideology and all of that, and this pro-Indian, India first stance. But Modi has also has had this self-styled image of being a champion of the poor. Considering that and the fact that, like we've discussed earlier, that the Indian farmers make up more than 70% of the worker population, then how is the Modi government going to be able to reconcile the fact that they are not giving in to the demands of such a large number of the Indian population who is poor, who's dependent on their livelihoods in the agriculture sector, and then be able to say and claim all of the promises they've made in the elections or talked about how they want to raise the situation from poor, the people from poor conditions and out of poverty?
I think he has garnered support as far as Indian population is concerned, not because of the pro-poor policies. It was primarily he attracted the hardcore Hindu nationalist segments of the society, and he really appealed to their emotions that India could be turned into a Hindu state. And we have seen the examples how India deviated from secularism to and becoming a Hindu state led by Hindutva forces, including Sangh Parivar and RSS. Why he is not paying any attention to this particular movement which is going on right now? I think we should be more concerned about not about how their issues are going to be resolved, but more concerned about if it gets protracted. It could be a problem for Pakistan in the sense that Modi would like to divert attention from domestic issues towards Pakistan.
Right.
We have seen that in the last 3 weeks, no serious effort was made to engage with the farmers or their representatives. Even today, when Modi spoke about engaging them, he didn't give any charted territory, precisely speaking, because he doesn't want to resolve this issue, because he wants to stick with whatever he has decided, and he would like to continue with the policy of reforms he has introduced, and he's not going to listen to the demands, the major demands of the farmers, because he believes that what he is doing is right for the country.
Right.
When you become, we have a holistic approach, and you believe that you have the total wisdom how to lead the country of 1.3 billion people. And I think that's a dangerous trend which Pakistan is looking with a lot of concern. And even today, as I mentioned earlier, our foreign minister mentioned that. So I think farmers' movement in India probably would be crushed ultimately, because the more you stay there in the open, the more you get weakened, and ultimately when less people are left there, it would be easy for the law enforcement agencies to deal with them.
Absolutely.
So I think ultimately the problem would be resolved with the use of force, not through negotiations or not backtracking from whatever Mr. Modi announced or the kind of reforms.
And we've seen the past record also
introduced.
show that Modi has been able to get away with the use of force or get away with such policies, despite the fact that there is a lot of international condemnation and widespread protests going on. Mr. Ahmed, considering the options that Modi has, one of them, of course, is the use of force and to be able to disperse the protesters. We know that they're in the spotlight right now, so that might not be the wisest of options. But like I said, Modi has done that in the past, and and has been able to get away with, from what happened in Gujarat back in a long time ago to what has been going on since they've been into power, just goes to show that a lot of it can happen without consequences.
Another example is repealing Article 370
right,
in
and
Kashmir.
it's been what, more than a year now, and there hasn't been a tangible consequence to that, even though it's a huge international violation. Do you think that the fact that the Modi government has had this history, even this protest is going to be dispersed to the use of force, despite whatever damage they're going to suffer, the farmers are going to suffer, or whatever international reputation is at stake?
So
Will
I
they be-
think I
will
would
they do
like to
that?
draw parallel between America and India on this subject. In America, we have also seen a very extreme position taken by Trump on multiple issues, whether it is Corona or whether it is economic policies, foreign policies, and his certain stances which went wrong in the end.
Right.
So he was also relying on the popular white vote of America, and he was hoping that, and he was very confident about this thing. But I think when you continue similar kind of targeting against the minorities, and the international communities are also watching, and there is a certain kind of perceptions then which is built internationally and nationally, which in fact helps in creating some sanity.
So there is a threshold to all of this.
Yeah, even in the majority popular vote of whether it is in America or whether it is in India.
But what is the threshold, considering Modi got
I think-
re-elected last year?
Yeah,
What is the India's threshold that the world is
from
looking
that
for?
point, I mean that was what Modi has touched the popularity once, second time, and I think from there onwards, if we look at the economy, if we look at the international repute and image of India, if we look at the different issues, I mean in last 5 years 140,000 farmers, they have committed suicide.
Right.
And now it is being seen by the international communities also. It is being heard there. People are talking about it. People are talking about in India. So in my opinion, that threshold is now either it is crossed or it is near to be crossed.
Okay.
When sanity
Hopefully.
will prevail, and opposition and the majority popular vote of Hindu, they will also think about their country. I think this is one advantage
Because they
India
are
had.
sympathetic to the farmers, of course, and the
Yeah.
larger population in India have their associations with the farms and the agriculture sector,
Yeah.
and the farmers
I mean,
in
look
general.
at the success of the strike which they conducted.
Right.
I mean, 250 million participated
Abso-
countrywide.
Absolutely. Our guest on Skype, Mr. Dabinderjeet Singh, wanted to add something. Go ahead.
India faces, it has a weak opposition. And what the farmers' protest has shown is they've shunned all the politicians because they believe people power is ultimately where India must change. And if you think about it, if you start to target minorities, which is what the Modi government did, eventually you get to a point you've targeted so many people. The students raise their voices. The poor people raise their voices, because the one thing that we've not touched upon is the reason why the farmers are so upset around the exploitation is the corporates. And I think the power has got to Narendra Modi's head. The corporates that basically will benefit from this, tomorrow, for example, in London, one of those corporates that owns the biggest toy store in London, Hamleys, will see a protest. And therefore, the farmers are saying, hold on a minute, this is not the Modi government that is there for the poor or the farmers. It's there to support his friends and corporates. And I think in India, there is a huge amount of poverty. And if this farmers movement grows, the opposition may not be able to lead the way, but people power could remove the Modi government.
Right, and people's power is extremely important. We've seen that in many examples and instances of history where the international opinion and public opinion and the movement of people actually really makes huge differences in where the future course of action is. And you're right, the fact that Modi government has been criticized in the past as well of being cozy with the big industrialists and the big billionaires, both within India and outside. And this goes to show the fact that perhaps the BJP government is not as sympathetic to the plight of the poor as they may vocalize. Musharraf, my next question would be to you, considering the fact that we've discussed earlier how Pakistan's role is being played in this regard, not just in terms of a false flag operation, which is a huge possibility, but the fact is that this is something which Pakistan has also been talking about earlier, also the fact that India is not a responsible state, or India is not the kind of democracy that it portrays itself to be, and it is not a credible state which allows its citizens to be able and respects them, to allows its minorities the freedom that they should enjoy as citizens of the country. And then of course there are human rights violations at Kashmir and in other parts of India as well. And there is so much that has been pointed out internationally also that India has been doing to destabilize the region, Pakistan, and of course have this whole campaign of fake news. Considering all of this, how can Pakistan also play its part in the farmers' protest and make sure that the voice is heard internationally regarding the fact that the regime that it now sits in India is not a responsible one?
Well, Sana, Pakistan has been doing its part to unmask RSS, BJP-led fascist government in New Delhi, and Prime Minister Imran Khan has been been spearheading this narrative on international level, and Pakistan has raised this furiously this stance that India under BJP and Modi is a real threat not only to the regional peace but to the international peace and stability, and that is the stance which has been heard by the international community, and of course that has been supported by the international community. And you can see that now the Indian diaspora all across the world, they really feel Pakistan's support, and Pakistan's stance has
and
really supported
it should make
them.
sense to them.
Yes, the international community is also already sensitized about that, and farmer protest comes now, and the diaspora is really, it's helping diaspora to raise their voice and make international community know what actually Modi government is doing in India.
All right.
Yes.
All right. My last question would be to Mr. Dabinderjeet Singh. Considering the fact that when we talked about the power of the people and the fact that we need to involve local authorities in different parts of the world, make sure the voices are raised as much as they can to help these protests and the farmers, how much do you think and how much more does the international community need to do to be able to respond to this, to be able to help and support the protests, considering the fact that economic and political factors always come into play and hinder the support and influence that foreign governments or foreign representatives can play in these situations? How much do you think needs to be done by the international community, and what it is that you are expecting from them?
I think what you've got is India wants to be on that world stage, on the front table. And what they've often said is, look at the changes, look at the reforms. I think the eyes of politicians in different countries are opening up. I think they knew deep down the human rights violations, the Hindutva agenda was there. Actually, what they've experienced under the current Modi government is India represents not only a challenge to the minorities of India, but actually to world peace. And so currently what we're working on is we've got a change of administration in the US. Joe Biden has spoken up to condemn India's and the BJP's human rights violations in the past. He's been relatively silent since he became the president-elect. And I think it's that international coordination that can put real pressure on India to say this is not the way to treat people. And when you get a people uprising, and all I would say is I give one very simple example. When Imran Khan took the initiative over the Kartarpur Sahib initiative,
Right.
he created an immense goodwill amongst the Sikh people, a huge amount of respect, and that rippled across other countries to non-Sikhs, to non-Pakistanis, that you had here somebody, it was like the Berlin Wall coming down. And yet, on the other side, you have the Modi government that's been targeting Kashmir and having all these laws, and now the farmers. So I think if we've seen a change of administration in the US, a world power, if it gets together with China, I can tell you UK and France will follow. So if the permanent members of the United Nations decide to take a stand, that's ultimately, I think, where things will go, that will stop the Modi government actually trying to kill this movement off. The other thing, I did say this, and I will finish on this, the feeling amongst those people there, young and old, is yesterday they said, we will not be going home. Our bodies may go back. When you hear that sort of sense of they are prepared to put their lives at risk, I think Narendra Modi knows the history of the Sikhs and the Punjabis in particular. And we never back down. And I think that is, with that international support, we can really expose the true face of Narendra Modi.
And you're right, that is a huge resolve, of course. When you come down to sacrificing your life and not caring about that, then this is something that is huge and that the Modi government will have to face. Thank you very much, Mr. Dabinderjeet Singh, for joining us, and thank you for all the guests in the studio as well. It's absolutely of essential importance that whatever kind of support that these farmers need, or whatever actions that are being done by any member of the international community, like Mr. Dabinderjeet was saying, has a ripple effect, just like Prime Minister Imran Khan's efforts in this regard regarding the Kartarpur corridor, or to be able to protect the minorities in the country. And so, of course, any effort that is being taken to support and raise voice for the farmers in India is going to help their resolve and to make their stance even stronger. But what remains to be seen is whether or not the Modi government will back down from this. That's all for now. Thank you for watching.